It was something so incredible that I wanted to remain there. But I was told that it was not my time, that I was not supposed to be there. And then one of the absolute most incredible things occurred. And so what I'm about to share with you and your audience is like absolutely astounding and life-changing.
This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my guest, Maria-Lupita Gurule. Hello.
Hello. So good to see you, Heather.
Same here. We met a couple of years ago at an IANDS conference, and I loved connecting with you. I've been wanting to have you on my show for so long, so I'm so excited that we're finally getting together to do this. You have a really incredible story. I know you've had multiple near-death experiences, but we'll kind of focus on one that was pretty in-depth. And you had just given birth. I think you're being prepped for surgery, and you take over from there and tell us what happened.
Yes, exactly. So 24 years ago, I died on the day that my daughter was born. And it wasn't because of her birth. It was because of a planned surgery, as you mentioned. So they left the catheter from an epidural that I had from her birth. It was about 3 hours before. And because I had such difficult pregnancies, this was my second really difficult. So it was determined through a specialist that I'd been seeing that I was going to have a tubal ligation on the same day. So the catheter in my back was inserted just a little bit further. And this one time it was meant as a spinal block. So I was meant to be awake and alert through the entire thing. So there's no way that the medications would have caused me to actually pass out. What happened with me, again, is that with the spinal block, I was supposed to be awake, alert, totally present. I was just supposed to be numb from a particular area down because of the surgery that I was going to have. And from the administering of the anesthesia through the spinal block, it stopped my lungs and it stopped my heart for approximately 8 minutes. And the very last thing that I remember after the anesthesia being given to me is the anesthesiologist asking me, are you okay? And I was gently looking over and I saw my mother holding my daughter, and I completely blacked out. The next thing I remember was like as though someone was in front of me. And I thought, well, this is really odd. If we're going to surgery, why are there two of us back to back? And what I realized is that, wait, I'm looking at someone from a different perspective, hovering above them as though I was standing. But I realized I was looking at myself. So my daughter was born in a maternity ward, and I was being transported to a general surgery area that was on a different floor. And so the time that it took to be wheeled into the elevator headed towards, I had crashed. And so they needed to intubate me as well as resuscitate me. And all the while this is happening, I have no connection and I'm hovering above my body, seeing all of this happen. They finally wheel me into the scheduled operating room reserved for me for the surgery. And there was so much chaos in a hurry to get to the resuscitation equipment because I was en route when all of this happened. There was even a cart that had crashed over. And I saw myself, and I didn't realize down the hallway that was first indeed me. But then I started seeing all of this around me, and I realized, like, what is happening? I was hovering above myself, head to foot. So as though I was looking down upon myself. And in that moment, after all this chaos and no connection, it was as though there was a pinpoint of light that seemed to consume the room. It was like the proverbial tunnel, but it was the opposite. It wasn't like a darkened experience. It was nothing but light, a pinprick of light that began to consume. And as this was happening, I was simultaneously like rolling over and beginning to lift even further upwards, like towards the ceiling, but I never actually crossed a ceiling boundary. It was as though that white light had begun to consume everything. And I found myself in this place that had absolutely no boundary. It was like the brightest of the brightest that you could possibly imagine. It was the whitest of the white. And it was like a million suns that were in front of me, but it did not burn. It was not hot, but yet I could see through it, but it was the brightest thing. And the next thing I began to feel is like this vibration, but also simultaneously hear what sounded like music. But yet there was no instruments, there was no singing, but it was like this living vibration that was through everything, as though like angel voices or what you would expect that to be. And I knew that I was no longer in my body. I was no longer of this earth plane, and I did not care. And before me began to appear greater and larger than life, this most beautiful, magnificent, translucent image of this most sacred woman. And in between her heart center, I could see this most magnificent, like 2-part fire. It was like this blue flame that began to intertwine with this red flame. And as my eyes were looking at her larger than I could possibly even describe, because she was translucent, I could see through her. And this very faint image, even larger than she, this image of this male figure. And I understood that in this sacred place of their heart centers, they were connected in the heart. And that she was that of like this most sacred blue flame, and that he was of this red. But then between it was this most piercing white light that was like the source of all of this light around where I was at. And I knew that that was like what I call like the God center of the universe. But with these two most magnificent beings, it was like an inner communication without use of words, of like receiving me. And it was the absolute most incredible feeling of love, of unconditional love that you could begin to even possibly imagine. I have no words to describe it because of our common use of the word love here. But it was something so incredible that I wanted to remain there. But I was told that it was not my time, that I was not supposed to be there. And then one of the absolute most incredible things occurred. Now, I preface this by saying that my NDE happened 24 years ago. And I have had the privilege and the benefit of actually coming to fully understand what this NDE was, what the messages that I received, and had time to integrate all of this. And so what I'm about to share with you and your audience is like absolutely astounding and life-changing. So from that place of that pure white light, before me appeared a singular being, and from this singular being there emanated like 3 other beings. I take them to be like a part of a council that I know to be my council of guides. There was always one particular being with me, but there was the 4 different groups of additional 3 beings, a total of 12. And it was as though they were like almost like Russian dolls. Like they were part of like what you would expect when mirrors face each other. And if you just turn it slightly, you see an infinite number. But then you turn it again directly, you only see the 2 beings. So that was like in the way that these beings appeared to me. It was as though the translucence of these 2, that's blessed, what I know to be now the Blessed Mother, and that of like Jesus, the Christ consciousness, is that these beings were affording me an opportunity as a soul to understand what I was, what I came to do, what I agreed to do, and what our soul's purpose is on this earth. And so with that intention and that understanding and their care, I felt very, very like a stern kind of energy, like a commanding kind of presence, that I knew that they were very wise, that they were greater and bigger than myself, helping to guide me. And I felt very small in their presence and even a little bit uncertain, but very, very loving. And with that, translucence of pure white with just the idea of arriving at a place to do like a life review. It was as though the facility was moving at the same time that our physical bodies were moving. It was as though we were creating this space that out of need, and our thought and this space would appear and kind of come towards us as we gravitate towards it. And I understood that a life review isn't something that is done at us, like we're on trial somehow. But I began to look at my own life, very similar to what we are like now. This again was 24 years ago, and the commonality of having like laptops and smartphones wasn't really around at that time. But it was as though I was looking at a living book, and I could see parts of myself in that story that would appear like on a little screen, and it was interactive. And then I would be able to cast it up onto this much larger than life kind of screen. And I was really going through one of the most difficult times in my life at the time that this occurred. And I could not and did not want to face what was happening. I was about to undergo like the greatest trial, soul trial of my life. And I didn't want to face it. I would have rather have been gone. And so since my daughter was born, I thought, okay, now I'm done. I'm going to take my first out. And what they began to show me is that these difficult trials on earth are things that I myself created so that I could apply the learning that I had as a soul. It is as though we on the other side are in the most greatest grand school of soul evolution, that we're learning these things in theory, like in books in college. And then we go out into the real world and begin to apply these things that we learn. Well, it's the same thing as a soul. I myself wrote these things within my experience, and I couldn't accept it because I was going through one of the most extreme things, had experienced some of the most horrific violations that many of us souls do. And I was having a hard time integrating that knowledge and that wisdom. And so from this original group of my one that has always with me in this first group of three, I was having, again, such a tie and attachment to the human imprint that I couldn't get over it. And so I was afforded this other ability or this gift from the other side, that another group of three appeared, again with my one. And again, with the thought and with intention and purpose, another space appeared, and it's like we gravitated and moved towards it. And it was like this most sacred temple of light. And it was that same kind of pure light that was concentrated even stronger, like liquid light in this pool. And it seemed like I could see all of the heavens and all of the stars and all of eternity. And so in this most magnificent, like golden pool of light, I immersed myself, or I was immersed in it by this other group of three. And it was effervescent like acid, and it began to like melt away and remove the residue of these imprints that I'd carried, and kind of like a cleansing and a releasing of this experience. And after that immersion, it felt like something had occurred. Like I had a detachment from my human personality that held all the pain and all the blame, the shame, the guilt, the worry, the fear, the anger, all of those lower realms. And I began to shift into something different, something more light, something clearer. And I had a clearer understanding that where from this detached perspective, I could see the perfection in all of it and how I myself chose it. And so this awareness came to me after this immersion of this waters, and then going back to this life review space, this sacred space. And I was then joined by the three that were helping to go through this life review and guiding and me looking at choices. And this other group of also another three with, and also always the one with me. I took that to be like my tethered angelic guide. And I do say angelic guide because it's a vibration that this being carried, like ever tethered to me, ever watchful, loving, and wise, correcting me when I needed to be corrected, but also lovingly, helping me integrate all of this experiences. So from that space, the continuing of the life review, and I understood why these things happened. These violations and atrocities occurred. Why I didn't think that I could survive, and why we as humans are here to overcome all of that. From that higher perspective of this greater integrated wisdom, it was like I transformed. Like I became this merged part of my higher self, if you would call it. A greater part of us is already tethered on the other side. And as I was merged with her, and in that process, there appeared another group of 3 beings. In this group of 3 beings, it was a grander scale of our agreed upon joint mission of all of our souls upon the planet. I was taken again by that same thought, the place would appear and that we would gravitate towards it, but this was very, very different. This energy that I was being taken to was more grand and more vast and different than these other spaces that I had been in before. From this place, I was standing what appeared to be like on the top of a hill or like a cliff, if you will. And I knew that I was on the very edge of this valley below me, and this huge valley carried every most magnificent species of flower that you could even possibly imagine, and with colors that are indescribable and I have yet to see in this earth experience. Colors that I can't even begin to describe, that like if you would imagine if a butterfly sees an ultraviolet, I was able to see in all of these spectrums with colors that I could not even begin to imagine. And it was like these rolling hills of every color of green before me. And I knew that every hill also had a valley and had a pool of souls. And it was infinite. And I could still see similarly like to this sacred healing waters temple where I could see the cosmos. I could still see those same cosmos in this place standing on the edge of this rolling hill. And I knew that every flower below with every color, so if you can imagine a sea of purples, and every color of violet and purple that you can even begin to imagine, and every flower had just enough of a different color to be unique. And I understood that that was us. And in this place of knowing and deep communications with like telepathy, inner soul communication, like being told that I was going to touch every soul, all of them. And I thought, how? It's just me. And in that moment, it was always like this cosmic breeze kind of just swept in, and the whole sea of flowers, like a field, began to move all in unison. And then in that moment, I could see like what appeared their roots underneath, and saying like, well, we're all part of one root system, even though we're individual little sprouts. And that is what we are. Then that's what it means, that we are all one. That one of us, if one of us makes it, all of us make it. And if none of us make it, we all remain. And I knew that we were inter and intra connected in this net and this web. And what I was seeing in the cosmos was like this cosmic web that had like multiple universes, and each one of them interacting each on their own. And there were like 12 all working together. It was the most magnificent thing I'm trying to put human words to. And I wanted to come back. From wanting to die and not being able to face my life, I wanted to come back, and I understood like we're here for a reason. There's a purpose that we chose to be here, and I want to be here. That no matter what we're about to face, like, oh my God, I chose this. That we have hailed and heeded the call from all corners of the universe to be here at this most sacred moment, and I wanted it. So with that excitement, I was able to hold onto that, and that I still feel even to this day. As you can see, I carry that like as a spark within me, and I know that's my life spark. I wanted this. So then I began to ask, how do I get back? And from that place, the final group of 4 appeared. And it's not a group of 4, always my one, and from there an additional 3. And from them working all together, the 4 of them together, it was as though I began a mission of planning this incarnation. And I saw myself that, I've been involved in that from even before I got here, and part of me is still there doing it. That we are tethered on the other side. And that we have connection, and many times when we sleep, that's the place that we go. That's what comes through many times when we're having these experiences out of body. That's like these healing temples. These places exist in another dimension, another place. And I began what I call my training for my return. It was a looking at incorporating the wisdom of the things that I had experienced up until then, so that I could gain enough courage to face those things when I returned, because they didn't disappear when I got back. And it was in preparation of my return to say, okay, well, these are some scenarios that could potentially happen. This is what you've written within your life's plan. This is your soul's mission. These are the people you're meant to meet, work with, how you're meant to work. This is the promise that you made. You're not fulfilling it. You need to get back into gear and utilizing your gifts of intuition, the spiritual gifts that you came with. I was disregarding all of those things. And so it was like an in-depth, massive training, like again, likening it to like a college of sorts. And so my being on the other side felt like an eternity. And it was really in truth a total of about 8 minutes that all of this occurred, because time does not exist the way that it does here in this earth plane. And it finally took all of this understanding to understand what we are. So from this training to get back, I felt ready. I felt that I was prepared enough, that I had enough of this integration and the courage to return. And what made me decide to return was the truth of being told is like, look, this is a realm of free will and choice, and your soul can indeed remain. However, now that you understand that this is of your own choosing, would you truly choose to remain? Or will you use the body that is still viable? Will you continue with your life, all the pain that you experienced, rather than having to start again from scratch? Because if I chose to remain on the other side of my own free will and choice, I eventually would want to return to fulfill those agreements that I made. And that I would have to re-experience all of those pains all over again. And probably even increase the amplitude of them, because I missed the point, and it gets stronger each time we miss the mark. So there is no out. In all this learning on the other side, that's one thing, but we want the adventure of application here as a soul. We want to apply these things that we know. And I knew this, and I finally understood this. And so with that decision of wanting to return, I made the choice. And so with my full group of 12, all in unison, that it felt like a semicircle all around. And from that place, it was as though it was an energy being sent towards me, and kind of like a seed that you would plant and that it would take hold. And it was as though I had closed my eyes. And when I closed my eyes, hand on my heart, it was as though when I opened my eyes again, I was in that first original place, that translucent, expansive, pure white, no form, no end and no beginning, pure light. And only this time, although I could see from the distance this grand, magnificent, most divine masculine Christ consciousness soul, before me, more like in a smaller form, more condensed, more concentrated, was what I know to be the Blessed Mother. Now, my name is Maria Guadalupe. I am named after the Blessed Mother's apparition in Mexico of Our Lady of Guadalupe, there in Mexico City. And the connection that I have not only with my name, but of that of the divine feminine, that is that most sacred energy. I saw her more concentrated, and she was holding a baby, like she was more material is what I'm trying to say. And standing beside her was my mother, and the Blessed Mother holding my child And she was in the form of Our Lady of Guadalupe. She kissed my daughter and then she handed her to my mother. And in that awareness, it was the most blessed mother, the sanctified energy, the God, the mother God, the goddess, and understanding like we are here to embody and embrace both of those. But it was from the grandmother holding my child to my mother, to me, her daughter, that I had a daughter. And I realized with that of, oh my God, I cannot leave my daughter motherless on the day that she is born. And I went into a panic, which brought on all of my human emotion. And rather than it being this most peaceful, grand separation, like, oh, it was more of like, oh my God, I got to get back. Oh my God, my daughter, I can't leave her motherless. What's going to happen? So a panic set in, and it was as though I had turned to run, and it felt like as though I had like jumped and leapt off of this 10-story building, and I crash landed into my physical body. And with that, I felt such intensified pain, and I couldn't move though. And the only thing that would stream is one singular tear from my eye. But it felt as though someone was holding my head and whispering, it's going to be okay. But I was beginning to like choke because I was intubated. I had an apparatus all the way down into my lungs, and they were breathing for me. And so it felt like I was beginning to gag, but I was like paralytic. I could not move my body at all. And finally, with that voice saying it's going to be okay, it's like they finally removed the intubation. They had resuscitated me, stabilized me, and then continued and proceeded with the surgery. So what should have, taken X amount of time, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, perhaps, took longer than it should have. And my mom was awaiting for me in the recovery room, and all I could do was just convulse. And she took one look at me and asking what had happened to me. And I told her, I don't know, but it felt like I was buried alive. And then came on the onslaught of recuperating. Now I know that my daughter must have felt it. I mean, she was part of my physical body and energy for over 9 months. That she was such in distress after her birth that in the recovery of being in the hospital, we remained for 3 days, both she and I. And even though they had the little bassinet, is a little clear bassinet next to it, I could not even, the moment I would attempt to even try to set her down, she would just scream like in this pain that I can't even begin to describe, this newborn infant. And now that she is 24, she has always had a fear her entire life of losing me because she lost me on the day that she was born. And she camped out with me for the full 3 days that I was there. And she has been tethered to me in an extraordinary soul way that I can't even describe in words. And so that was my experience. That was the most profound near-death experience that I've had, that has turned my entire life inside out and upside down. And that happened at age 27, just before I turned age 28. And so there's a lot of significance around that time, around that age, that most people experience on this earth plane. But needless to say, this forever indeed altered who and what I am and how I experience this world. So thank you for allowing me to share.
Oh, Maria-Lupita, wow. I mean, just when I think that, I've already heard so much with near-death experiences, along comes yours. I mean, it's really a very incredible experience that you had. And of course, I've got more questions for you on it, but let's go ahead and take that into part 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is one of the most profound near-death experiences I've heard, but it gets even better. You are going to hear things from Maria-Lupita in part 2 that I will bet you have never heard before. They are new to me, fascinating things that she saw and experience. So I do hope you'll come back for part 2. Here's just a little tiny taste of what's to come. You said we can change our reality. How do we do that? So what did the different valleys represent?
So they were also like variations of other worlds, other planetary systems. And even simultaneous with ours was like also other realities, because we have variations of realities that are coexistent, even upon this earth. And what I was being shown through all of this is that we are a system within systems upon systems and systems, and loops between loops, and time and alignments, and all of these structures that we can't even begin to possibly imagine.
So that's ahead in part 2, plus a whole lot more. We really get in depth on things. It is really interesting. What did you think was interesting that you heard in part 1, or what's new to you? Has it opened your mind to anything? Share all that in the comments. If you prefer just to say you made it, I always appreciate that. And those of you that watch regularly, thank you so much for all of your likes, for subscribing, for sharing these episodes with your friends. It all means a lot to me, and I so appreciate that you are helping me to build this channel. And as it grows, it just encourages me to stick around and to keep doing this. So thank you. You can always watch past episodes, by going to my playlist. Just type in Beyond with Heather Tesch in the search for YouTube. You'll find it. Otherwise, I always have a link in my description. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. And I'm telling you, you don't want to miss part 2. Thanks for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. Please add comments and questions you'd like future guests to answer. Also, if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. That'll help keep this podcast going. You can also go to Beyond with Heather Tesch to look for more episodes.